I think it's a great question. And, I think back recently, maybe a couple of months ago, I bumped into the principal of a big RIA here in Charlotte. Actually, the RIA that I use, believe it or not. And one of the heads of the firm, I forget where I bumped into him, but he said, "Oh man," he said, "I know you're in the life insurance and annuity business." He goes, "You won't believe." He said, "I saw this annuity recently, 3.5% fees, blah, 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 blah." Just goes in this whole thing, but you got to get rid of this. And the client doesn't understand it. And after he's kind of gone through his whole thing, I said, "Well, what kind of riders did it have on it?" And he was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, yeah, it's got all these fees. Like, what are the benefits that you get for the fees?" And his response was, he sort of looked like shocked and dismayed that I even asked the question, because to him, all he saw was the 3.5% fees, and he didn't really see the benefits. And so I think you're touching on a big issue in our business, which is, we kind of have we sort of have a large part of the investment world that's very focused on fees and has moved to a lot of passive strategies in an attempt to reduce fees in their investment portfolios for their clients. And you sort of have this incredible fee compression occurring on one side of the house. And then we have what looks like very kind of anachronistic products that don't really fit into that mold, that are, especially on the VA side, sort of very expensive relative to this. And if you come at them with the rubric of, reducing fees is always better, you're not really going to understand them. And I've found that in talking to RIAs, that is unfortunately more common than it should be, where they just look at the fees and don't look at the benefits. And so where does the money go? I'll say it goes into all the logical places you would think that it goes. And so one of the first things that I talk about whenever I talk to an RIA about this is I say, well, what do you think the management fees are at the insurance company? What do you think is really their fee for the overhead, which is most comparable to kind of the fund management expense on a mutual fund? What do you think that number is? And you get ridiculous answers: 100 basis points, 200 basis points. That's not at all what's going on. And you can see this. So if you look at a fee-based variable annuity with no riders, what's the M&E fee? It's 25 basis points. And so you kind of look at it and you go, okay, look, carrier overhead is not 100 basis points. It's probably in the neighborhood of 25 to 50 basis points, which at the end of the day is actually pretty comparable to what you'd get in a mutual fund or an actively managed mutual fund or an ETF. So I think that's kind of point number one, is it's not like there's lots of carrier profit built in and all these overhead expenses. At the end of the day, these are actually, variable annuities are actually fairly efficient wrappers, and the insurance companies aren't necessarily charging exorbitant management fees for themselves that are out of whack with what you'd have in a normal mutual fund or ETF. So that's kind of one spot where I start is, okay, what do you think about carrier overhead? And then I kind of work down from there and I say, okay, let's talk about commissions. And of course, every RIA or investment professional says, "Oh my gosh, variable annuity commissions are so high, 6-7%. Can you believe it?" And I say, well, okay, but yeah, let's think about this, right? So the surrender charge period on this thing is 7 years. What would you have charged on managing money for 7 years? Well, I charge 1% a year. Okay, well, 1% times 7 years is 7%. So that's about the same as an annuity. It's just that, they pay it up front and then they defer it out over the 7 years. And they do that as part of the M&E charge, which is why on a typical B share annuity, the M&E isn't 25 basis points, 125 basis points, 135 basis points, or 140 basis points, somewhere around there. And so in a lot of ways, that's just commission recapture, which looks pretty similar to what the RIA would have charged for an investment management fee anyway. And so as you kind of work down the stack, you go, okay, so there's investment, kind of carrier overhead, there's commission repayments, and then we have rider-based benefits. And I think this is where there's probably the most confusion. Well, the first two are a lot of confusion too, but this one is hard to value because, investment professional who's not into annuities might say, oh, well, it's, 125 basis points or 150 basis points. That sure sounds like a lot. And so you can see the clear cost for the rider, but there's no commensurate sort of benefit calculation. There's no way to say, yes, but the intrinsic value of the rider is 175 basis points. And so actually the carrier is, based on your kind of economic projections, the carrier is actually undercharging you for the benefit. We don't do a good job as an industry of explaining the real power of the benefits. And so people just see the cost and they assume that the cost is exorbitant because they don't have a good way to mentally model the benefits. And in my experience running pricing, I would say, and I also just looking at a lot of carriers out there that have gotten out of this business or having to take huge write-downs in their variable annuity block, it's pretty hard to argue that those riders are underpriced. I mean, I'm sorry, that are undercharged. Like the carrier's charging too much for that rider. They're charging too little for the rider. That's why they're taking all these write-downs. And so in a lot of ways, the value of the rider is greater than what the carrier is charging you for. It's just that a lot of people who are not in this business don't see it. So that's how I kind of think about where the money goes. And then the last piece is all the embedded fees and the funds inside the variable annuity, which sort of goes to subsidize a lot of different elements of the puzzle. But that's where the money really goes. And again, I think people generally just look at the high level, but don't really understand, because they don't understand where it goes. They don't see that it's not that this is some, the carrier is not being exorbitant in what they're charging. In a lot of ways, I think demonstrably the carrier is undercharging for the benefits they're providing. And that's the real power of the annuity in a lot of ways that I think goes missed by the public and their investment advisors.